Good afternoon, everyone. We have an exciting speaker today. For those of us in education, I guess we would say the last 6 months have been some of the most difficult 6 months as providing leadership as we're moving into a whole different era right now and trying to understand what COVID means to education. But today we're going to hear from Mary Mackbee. She's 50 years of distinguished service and a big face in the St. Paul Public Schools, and she's really helped them to really think about the public schools and reframing what public schools look like. She's 26 years as a principal at St. Paul Central High School. That is an awesome, wonderful career, and I bet there are many, many students who will say that she really made a difference in them getting through school and will be somebody that they will remember for a long time. She was the first African-American appointed to high school principal at Central, and she really was the beacon of some urban academic education, and St. Paul will always be grateful for that. It's really exciting. I'm sure her list of awards are really long, but just a few of them. She's Century College Woman of Distinction, International Baccalaureate Inspiration Award, and I love this one, Herbie's Award, after the Olympic hockey coach, Herb Brooks. I can imagine that the two of them have some very strong skills in the same direction. She's left a legacy of mentoring, caring and compassionate and inspiring and encouraging. And we are so grateful to have her speaking to us today. She's going to talk about reflections and lessons learned from 26 years of educational leadership. Mary Mackbee, thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for those wonderful words. Good morning to everyone present, and thank you for allowing me to share my thoughts on leadership and being a member of the St. Paul Public Schools family for over 50 years. Just so that you know a little bit about me, I arrived in Minnesota from New Orleans, Louisiana in 1966 after being recruited from Xavier University of Louisiana to teach English and Social Studies at Mounds Park Junior High, which is now the American Indian Middle School program on the East Side. The district at that time was recruiting Black teachers, and at that time the district population of students of color was 3%, but the teachers of color were still under that number, so they were recruiting Black teachers, and Xavier University being a historic Black college and having a large teacher education program, I think was a good place for them to recruit. There were about 3 of us who came that year to St. Paul, and I was placed at a junior high on the East Side. I remember that first year there were 29 new teachers that year. The population of that school was about 1,200 and 99.9% white. There was 1 student of color in the entire student body, and 2 staff of color, myself and Dr. Phillips, who was the assistant principal. And moving to Minnesota was not only culturally an adjustment for me, having been in all-Black schools and living in an all-Black neighborhood. Coming to Minnesota was a cultural adjustment as well as a weather adjustment. My first year here, I remember and I didn't drive. It was one of those Southern girls who had never learned how to drive. So when I came to Minnesota, I had to take the bus to Mounds Park, and we lived in a complex right across from Sears. But I remember the temperature one time was minus 59, and I think I took the bus that day. So, and I know I showed up at school, but I don't think 1 student did. And it got more interesting, of course, as the years went by, and I did get adjusted to the weather. Although I do spend a lot of my time indoors during the wintertime. But when I came in 1966, at that time in New Orleans, there was full integration of the public schools, a lot of white flight. Teachers were being terminated as the enrollments in the public schools were dropping. Therefore, teaching positions were very scarce, hence my journey to St. Paul. At the time, we had a professor at our college who was on an exchange program with Hamlin University, and he recruited 3 of us to come up to St. Paul to teach. It was easy for me because I was chasing a a young man who was my boyfriend at the time, who was at the University of Minnesota. But the three of us did arrive in St. Paul in the fall of 1966 and began our teaching career. My first 3 years at Mounds Park Junior High were quite enlightening. It was a different environment for me. As I said, I was one of the two staff of color. But the good news was that it was a very, very young staff and a very liberal-minded staff. And so we kind of bonded over our newness and had a great time teaching in the programs. But I remember that in my own education in New Orleans, I attended segregated schools, all Black students, all Black staff, my teachers and administrators. There were my heroes as well as my parents, and early on they inspired in me to go into the field of education and eventually in administration. Two of my favorite heroes, Dr. Mackbee Spears, was my high school principal. And he was a Harvard University graduate, yet he chose to be a principal in an all-Black school in New Orleans, and he believed in giving back to his community. So I admired him for years, and he passed away just a few years ago. My junior high principal was a fiery redhead, Mrs. Leah McKenna. Both of them became my vision of how an administrator should be. They were both totally dedicated to the well-being of their students. They pushed us to excel, to serve our community, and to be successful in every career choice that we pursued. And Mrs. McKenna showed me also that women make good administrators. And after teaching at Mounds Park Junior High for 3 years, I began teaching at St. Louis Park High School for 1 year. I was forced to do that because I was commuting from Bloomington to St. Paul. And since I told you didn't know how to drive until I came to St. Paul, I had 5 accidents in 1 year and decided I probably needed to be nearer to home to save my life, as we think. So I was at St. Louis Park High School, and I think I was the only teacher of color there I was just there for 1 year. And during the summer of 1970, after my first year at St. Louis Park High School, my husband and I adopted 2 sons. My ex-husband, Ursel Mackbee, at the time was a Minnesota Viking. So for the first time in my life, I didn't work for 4 months when I had the 2 boys. And so, but after that, I think my husband at that point was let go from the Vikings. And so I, of course, had to go back to work. So in January of 1970, I went to work at Como Park Junior High School with 2 infant sons. I remember going to daycare with them, one on the front and one on the back in our little carriers. And Como Park was a different experience. Mounds Park was an East Side school, mostly white, not too many issues. Como Park was a school that was being integrated more with students coming from the inner city, from the Selby-Dale area. And so I did experience, not personally, but racial incidences between students, especially the Rice Street kids and the Selby-Dale kids. And so that was the first time being in St. Paul that there was a lot of racial problems between students. And as the populations shifted, that became more evident in some of the other schools that I attended. But Como Park did give me one opportunity, and that was to become involved in a Rockefeller internship program. The district in 1976 decided they needed more administrators of color. So one of the administrators wrote a grant to the Rockefeller Foundation, and over a 2-year period, they recruited 8 administrators 8 teachers to become future administrators. And I was one of the 4 in the second year of that grant, and actually met my lifetime friend now, Nan Mizahara, who applied for the program. I don't know if she realized that it was really meant for Black educators, but as a Japanese woman, she decided she fit the category, so she was going to apply. And we have been friends now since 1976, lifelong friends. So in 1978, I was assigned my first administrative position at Harding High School as an assistant principal. And I didn't have an issue with race as an AP, but I did have an issue with gender as an AP, since I was one of the first females to be assigned as an assistant principal at a high school. Most of the men faculty there put me on notice that they would give me a test run for the year to see how I would do, because they felt that at that point, assistant principals needed more brawn than brains. And then I convinced them that I could negotiate kids out of difficulties just as well as I could physically separate them. But that was a good year, because I think the guys at the end of the year decided that I was an okay administrator. There was one incident, though, I have to relate to that I thought was quite funny. A lot of the guys on the in the building would go on a fishing trip every spring. And we had a teacher who loved to go fishing, and she wanted to be a part of the fishing trip. And I think it was a charge of like $20. And so she said, but I can't go by myself. Will you go with me? And I said, well, yeah, I'd go. If you want to go, I mean, I'm not a fisher person, but I'd go. And so we both put our little $20 bills in and decided we wanted to go fishing. And then pretty soon we found out that fishing trip was canceled. And what we didn't realize was the guys all stayed in one huge cabin. And so it would be a little difficult for them to share that space with us, especially it was difficult for their wives to be able to share that space. So needless to say, the fishing trips ended that year. But usually gender, as I became an administrator, became more of an issue, as I said, than actually my race. But I was at Harding as an AP for 4.5 years, and there were some tense situations as, once again, the district was integrating previously all-white schools. So Harding, we had kids from the Sellydale area coming over, about 125 daily, to integrate Harding High School. And there were issues with East Siders receiving the inner city kids in a good session. So we had, I think we started a Black social club for the kids, so they felt more comfortable. And we did have issues with the kids in terms of them accepting each other. So I was there for 4.5 years, and in 1982, I was appointed principal actually at the Career Study Center, which was an alternative high school for disaffected youth. And I was there for about 2 years, and it was a great program where students could go to classes half a day, and then for the rest of the day, they were actually in internships all across the city. And the district provided the payroll funding for that. But that program kind of lost touch because of it was a high price program to implement. So I was there for 2 years, and we worked to make sure kids had a lot of academic time. When I first came, we found out that they were required to be in school for 25 hours, but some of them had only 1 hour a week of English, 1 hour a week of math. They preferred to have 15 hours of woodshop or 15 hours of FIAD. And so we had to get them to understand that the majority of their time had to be in the academics. And so we changed that. And it was received well. And we knew that they needed those academic activities as well as some of the other things. So I was there for 2 years. And then to my surprise, in 1984, I was appointed principal at Harding High School. And it was at Harding that I became the first Black high school principal in 1984. And I was there through 87. But, and that population had changed a little. More Black kids were coming from the inner city, and there were more racial issues on the east side at that point. It was a very blue collar neighborhood, and the acceptance of students of color at that point was not very good. It was also the first time that I, as an administrator, dealt with a major incident. We actually had a bomb at school. In fact, I remember the custodian coming in and saying he found this object in the trash can by the trash dumpster, pipe with a watch and some wires. And he said, I really don't know what it is. And I said, it sounds like it's a bomb. And there had been a bombing of a restaurant on the East Side the previous week. So we did have to evacuate. I think it was like 20 degrees. And so we evacuated without the kids having to go to their locker. So we did have some parents who were upset because the kids were out in the cold, but we were able to gather them in the gym, which was a building that was not adjacent to the school. But that was my first time dealing with that kind of an emergency. And it reminded me that, because it was interesting. I couldn't leave the building. It was a sinking ship, and the captain, as I was called, couldn't leave. I just needed to make sure that everybody was safe and that the building was okay. And we worked through that. And but that was a difficult period. So I was there for 3.5 years as a principal. And in 1987, I was appointed interim director of secondary schools. I was in charge of overseeing all of the senior high schools in the district. And I worked in conjunction with Jerry Shannon, who was the elementary director. And I was there for about 7 years. And we tried to make our meetings more intimate. And rather than meeting all the time at the district office, we decided every other meeting we would meet out in the schools to be able to see how the schools were functioning and see our colleagues in their elements, and just to make it more of an intimate experience in terms of learning about each other and what our problems and our challenges were in all of our schools. And that worked well for a long time, although it was a lot of meetings, a lot of sitting in meetings, and it wasn't really my cup of tea. But in the spring of '93, then my then superintendent called me in his office and decided that they wanted new energy and new direction, and so I was demoted. And as I say, as my last act as director of secondary schools, I actually appointed myself to principal at Central High School. But that was a bleak period, and any of you who've had a situation in your workplace where your confidence has been eroded, you start to question whether or not your skills and your expertise are there. It was a downtime in my life. But one thing that helped me to be more optimistic, and I'm usually always optimistic, was the leader of the elementary schools association at that time printed an article and said, he didn't consider my and Jerry's demotion as a demotion. We were going back to being principals, and as far as he felt, that was one of the best and the most important positions in an educational system. And so that kind of lifted me up. In fact, I carried that article in my notebook for years. And in fact, when we had our opening meeting of all of our administrators, they always used to ask, the then superintendent would say, all people who have been promoted, please stand up. And so I stood up because that guy told me I was being promoted and I needed to honor my position. And I got a standing ovation from the audience. I'm sure the superintendent was not happy that they were not in favor of his decision. So I did go to Central in the fall of 1993. And as I said, I had to regain my confidence, but I was determined to do my best job. And in 1993, Central at that time had the highest enrollment of Black students in the district. And it had a dual reputation at that time as an excellent academic institution with their IB program and also as a tough inner city school. So my first thing to do was to recruit more teachers of color in academic areas, English, math, science, and social studies. And I felt that if we had teachers of color in those particular areas, that we would draw more students to the advanced courses. We encourage students to form diverse student organizations. It's a very diverse student body. It had the first LBGT student organization It had the first clinic, student clinic in the nation, and so it's been a school that's been the forefront for a lot of social causes. And we also worked hard with the staff to diversify the curriculum. We introduced courses like Harlem Renaissance, African American Lit, Asian Lit, Women's Lit, to make sure that students felt that they were represented in the courses, and especially in the upper level courses. So during that time at Central, there was a lot of ups and downs. I worked extensively with parents. It's a great parent group in transforming the Central entrance. Parents wrote grants. They worked with district personnel to redo the front so that our school presented an entrance, they felt, that matched the excellent programs that were present within. And if you ever drive by, you see that the entrance looks very nice, looks like a college entrance. And that's all due to the parents. I simply supported them and worked with them, but they did all the hard work in terms of finding the money and working with the district and making sure that that project actually happened. While I was there, I worked through a riot, a teacher being assaulted, an attempted suicide in the building, various student discipline issues. We had an issue with our SRO that went public and viral that caused us some consternation. And I know from the recent school board vote that they have voted to eliminate the SROs in the building for the next year. I would have hoped that they would have waited to vote on that, figure out how they're going to keep the schools safe without the police. But at Central, we created a culture of a family. It's a great staff. I think one of the most important things that a principal has to do is to hire the appropriate staff and staff that are willing to work with the kids and the families and that are dedicated to improving the lives of the children that they teach. I also oversaw the advent of technology, which I have to admit is not my best expertise. In fact, when I retired in the summer of 2019, and then saw all the chaos that followed with COVID-19 and online schooling, I thought that I must have had a premonition that I would have a hard time working through the technology of online and communicating with staff through technology. So I don't know, maybe somebody was, some angel was over me, but helping me to make that decision early. But so 50 years, it's a lot of time to spend in one place. Although I have a friend I talked to yesterday who's been at Harding High School for 47 years as a teacher and is thinking about retiring. But some of the lessons that I have learned after 50 years of service, and of course 25, 26 at Central. And I turned 75 when I retired, and I decided my time was up. I needed to spend some more time for myself and with my family. I have 3 children, 8 grandchildren, so I have plenty of time now to interact with them and do things with them. But some of the lessons that I think I have learned, one is that first, your family, your traditions, the past plays an important role in your character. So you have to look back to the people who have made you to be the person that you are today, and understand that all the values that they've given us. And as an administrator, I tried to focus on what the school's mission was, and also on the people who make that mission happen by hiring great staff, diverse staff, and people who wanted to be at the school and who wanted to interact and work with the diverse student body that we had. And we also needed to focus on the actions that supported our mission. And I've always told people that I always made the decisions, whatever it was on, based on the information I had at the time. And I tried never to second guess myself once more information came in. You know, you only can do it with what the information you have at the time, and then be confident that you made the right decision based on that information. I told my teachers we had a mantra that they were to treat every child as if they were their own and always display respectful behavior. Think of your own child in any situation and how would you want that teacher or that adult to interact with your child. And then do the same. Just consider that person or that student your child and act accordingly. And the other thing in terms of disciplining staff, try to always leave people's dignity intact. People make mistakes. Yes, they have to be disciplined, but it can be done in a humane manner so that people still feel that they are valued for who they are, not for maybe the action that they perform. And I always tell people, and my kids tease me, but I quote Cinderella, be kind and have courage. But yeah, be kind to people. And in my instance, it came to true. I said, be kind to people when you climb up that ladder, because you never know who you're going to meet when you're coming back down, which I did come back down. And I can tell you that my experiences in St. Paul are really good ones. I mean, the good things always outweigh the bad experiences or the bad incidences that have occurred while I was at the helm of a school. But once I got back into a building like Central High School, I realized that my best job was being in a high school building, working with kids, interacting with kids, working with parents, trying to give them the best education possible so that when they went out in the world after Central, they would be prepared for whatever good things came their way. So thank you very much. I appreciate your listening to my story. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer any of them.
Thank you so much, Mary. I love that. Be kind and have courage. I think that is really important. I think too, we're going to have some questions asked, but sometimes we hear about folks asking questions about our young folks being leaders. And what do you think and what do you see as our young folks are graduating? Do you see those leadership skills coming out of them?
Absolutely, especially the kids that I interacted with at Central. They were great leaders. They rose to every occasion, every kind of incident that we had. It was the students who were out front, demanding change. I can't tell you how many things we had on the front step, kids protesting this and that. And no, these kids are future leaders. They're very concerned about social issues, and they're very active in terms of trying to make the world changing for the better. So no, I think we're producing great leaders.
I agree. Mike Gregory, I believe, has a question.
Yeah, given your experiences that you had with racial tensions and just working with students, what are some of the techniques or some experiences that you want to share with us associated with de-escalation, facilitation, and negotiation?
Well, the one thing I think that worked for us at Central was to make every student feel that they had a place in the building, they could belong. So we had all kinds of organizations, ethnic-based organizations. We had the Muslim Association of Students, we had the Black Association, we had the Jewish Association of Kids, we had the LBGT, we had Hispanic groups, we had Hmong groups. So we had all sorts of groups that kids could belong to outside of the classroom and still feel like a part of the entire school. It's important that they all feel like they have a place.
Can you think of any specific actions that you took personally?
Well, we made it very easy for organizations to evolve. We said any student can start any organization as long as it was a productive one and was not going to harm people. We ended up with a Fisher Persons Club, believe it or not. But so we opened it up so that anybody who had an interest and felt that they had a group of kids who wanted to follow that interest could pursue it. So, I mean, we had over 80 some clubs and organizations that kids could belong to outside of the classroom.
Dave Bartholomew, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. I was just kind of curious. we have the challenge always with disciplining students, but then you also have the issue of, if you suspend these kids, they're not in the classroom and they're out and about. So I was curious as to how you handled that times when you needed to be disciplinary, but also didn't want to necessarily, you wanted to kind of keep the kid in the building maybe, so you could do more help.
Well, for some of the offenses, especially the nonviolent ones, we offered kids an alternative to a Saturday school or to after-school detention. It was only in the most extreme cases, in terms of violence or needing to separate two kids from the building so that they didn't upset the entire school, that we went with suspensions. And we tried not to make them long. And we always sent homework home with them. So kind of like the distance learning for suspended kids. But sometimes you just have to separate certain kids from the building in order to maintain a semblance of calm and safety.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, I have a question. I can't raise my hand. Sorry. Dr. Mackbee, what are you hearing from your colleagues? I know you've been out of the classroom now for a while and enjoying that. And I know you're in the high-tech group, but what have you found or hearing from your colleagues about the pandemic and how the students are learning, doing the distance learning, and how is that playing out in what you've heard?
Well, in talking to some of the teachers and the counselors, and even my own daughter, who's has to, she's got 3 kids at home during this time, and they've been distance learning. And she's mostly been in charge of that. She's trained as a teacher herself, but it's and she works out of home, so it's chaotic, to be able to have to be able to do those 3 roles: teacher, mother, and then worker. And people are telling me that they certainly would prefer kids being back in school, but they're also concerned about the health safety of everybody. Distance learning is difficult for the teachers that I've talked to, and it's not as good as an in-person experience with students. And so students lose out a lot. And so do teachers, with that direct connection with staff. So I don't know what's going to happen in the fall. I know the St. Paul district has looked at a hybrid implementation in part in person, part distance learning. But I know my daughter is concerned about the health of her children, and she's hoping that there is a distance learning option, that if those parents want to do that to ensure the health and safety of their kids, if they had that option.
Thank you. Ed Staniski, would you like to ask your question?
Sure. I'm kind of curious. There's a lot going on with race relations right now, right? You can't turn on the TV without seeing turmoil and conversation about it. Over your time in the schools, have race relations improved, gotten worse, stayed the same? I want to be optimistic, I guess.
Well, it's really it's been a roller coaster, I would say. In the early days, like in the when I was first at Harding in the late 70s, early 80s, when there was more busing of inner city kids to outlying schools, that was the beginning of some racial issues in like schools that were in the outline, out of the inner city area, and it calmed down a little, and then the more diverse we became in terms of other populations entering into our school system, the more challenges that were presented between kids, just interacting with people of different cultures and not understanding, and just being kids and how they respond, more in terms of physical response rather than any kind of cognitive response when they had issues. So it didn't get any better. It didn't get any worse. It kind of is just there, and you have to deal with it.
So Mary, one of the things I've heard two people say is that people will say, well, has it gotten worse? But the difference is we have technology that catches every moment now.
Yes.
where a lot of these things were always going on. It feels worse because technology has put it up in front, but there have been issues we've dealt with for a long time.
Yes, I can tell you technology exacerbated the discipline issues in the schools. In fact, all administrators will tell you if it weren't for internet, we'd have a lot less problems. You know, kids are cyberbullying, they're insulting people, they're putting pictures and things online, which just makes it more difficult to handle these discipline issues in the schools. So yeah,
Absolutely.
technology has not helped discipline in the schools at all. And then we gave them all iPads too, so that didn't help.
Well, Mary, I want to really thank you for creating that culture of excellence in education. I know that what you have done in St. Paul goes much farther than just the St. Paul district. And I do believe in everything that you've talked about today. Being kind and having courage is a great model that I can see that you live by. So thank you so much for joining us today. And Terry, do you want to talk about the plaque?
Sorry, just a moment, please. Getting myself unmuted. Mary, really appreciate you being here today. And now, after so many years in the classroom and making such a difference in so many young people's lives, you're really an optimist, and we appreciate that, and we appreciate what you've done and continue to do for the youth and the community and your family and so forth. So we have for you one of our Optimist plaques. We will get this sent to you. Unfortunately, I just can't hand it through the computer like I'd like to do when you'd have it. But it's our Optimist creed, and I think it will serve you well and remind you of your time here with us today and the great things that you've done in your career. So thank you very much, Mary.
Well, thank you very much too.